So we've been covering here on this show, of course, the allegations of Tara Reade of sexual assault against Vice President Joe Biden. And yesterday we talked about this pretty unbelievable conversation between Ben Smith of the New York Times and Dean Baquet, who's, of course, executive editor of the New York Times, about the way that they handled this story. Now, of course, in comparison to Julie Swetnick, totally debunked and bogus allegations against Brett Kavanaugh, which took 1 day to write a story about. It took them 19 days to write a story about Tara Reade allegations, which are much more credible, whether you think it happened or not, have much more credible contemporaneous evidence. She told 2 people at the time. Also, turns out they edited the story at the Biden campaign's request. Yep. And generally speaking, a lot of people who claim to be in the Believe Women, Me Too movement, Alyssa Milano, and all the rest, suddenly, now that these allegations are inconvenient, they don't want to talk about it, and they have all sorts of excuses why. There's lots of red flags here, when in reality, yes, of course, there are always question marks, and nobody is ever going to know for certain what happened then. But in terms of the hallmarks of credibility, they're there for Tara Reade.
Oh, yeah, and this is the hypocrisy is what bothers me so much. Let's take a look at Michelle Goldberg. She's an opinion writer over at the New York Times. This is one of the champions of the Christine Blasey Ford testimony and all that. And look at what she does. What to do with Tara Reade's allegation against Joe Biden. And what to do in there is being like, well, some people should examine the red flags, and it's difficult.
It's
and
messy,
it's like,
blah, blah, blah.
Just say it.
Whereas with Christine Blasey Ford, throw it back up there. She's heroic.
Yeah.
Okay?
Say it. Just say you don't believe her and you want to vote for Joe Biden because you think he's the lesser of 2 evils.
Yeah, at least be honest about it.
Fine. You know what? That is a perfectly legitimate political position, which millions of people make all the time. But say it. But you can't pretend to be Michelle Goldberg is, one of these cheap champion Brooklyn feminists. And look, she's a hypocrite, just like everybody else.
When it comes down to
tell you.
Your principles mean nothing unless they mean something when it's hard.
Yeah, when it goes against what you want.
When it goes against when you're, if you have a set of principles, but they only apply when things are convenient, then you have no principles. Yeah. That's the reality here. AOC, however, gave a very different response. She was asked about those allegations and how people should think about them. And she said it's legitimate to talk about them, which in and of itself takes courage. She also said silencing of all dissent is a form of gaslighting, which is so well said and so true, and what is exactly what is happening here with the Tara Reade story.
Yeah, they are. I mean, it's being not only just silence. First, it was silence. Then, when Biden became the nominee and Bernie was out, there was a literal conspiracy of the Washington Post and the New York Times and all these other people working at the behest of the Biden campaign, basically holding off. They admit to writing the story exactly the way that they want, examining Tara Reade's allegation against not the headline of "Woman Accuses Joe Biden of Sexual Assault."
Right.
Then their New York Times, the op-ed writers come out. Amanda Marcotte, who wrote that, Salon article, saying basically that this is a BS allegation, goes on Pod Save America, the former Obama people, advisors. And they all talk about how this is BS. I mean, again, this is a actual conspiracy in front of your very eyes in order to cover up what is happening here. That is gaslighting of the highest order, because it's not just silence, it's counter-programming of saying it's okay. What they want to do is give all of their viewers, listeners, supporters, etc., people who believed Christine Blasey Ford, the permission to say, I think Tara Reade is a liar.
Yeah.
And by doing that, you are a hypocrite.
It's really interesting talking to Rich McHugh yesterday, who was Ronan Farrow's producer at NBC when they were tracking down. He was one of the people that helped to bring down Harvey Weinstein. Very serious reporter, journalist who takes these things seriously, carefully, and has looked at the allegations and told us that, in terms of how you can evaluate these things, first of all, that it's credible. He also, though, I thought did a really effective job of knocking down some of these BS red flags that are thrown up as cover so that people can still think of themselves as feminist while dismissing Tara Reade. The most probably ridiculous one of them is the Russia thing.
Yes.
What does it matter? How do her views, you're allowed to have weird or fringe or loony or whatever views, that does not relate to whatever happened between her and Joe Biden in 1993. But again, it gives you insight into the Russia insanity that has infected the Democratic mind. But I also thought it was really important how he talked about that, one of the ways that Tara has been dismissed is that her story, quote unquote, changed over time. Well, it didn't really change. She just didn't tell her full story to start with. And he said that in talking to a number of the Harvey Weinstein survivors, they saw exactly the same pattern where, for very understandable reasons, women don't tell their whole story at the beginning, because that is going to be associated with their name and Googleable for the rest of their lives. They may not trust the reporter. They may just feel vulnerable. They may know the way that they're going to get smeared, just as Tara Reade is being smeared right now. So I thought it was really interesting to talk to him, but also the piece of Tara says she filed a sexual harassment claim within the Senate Personnel Office at the time. The Biden team absolutely rejects that any of that ever happened. Well, those papers exist. They're being held by the University of Delaware under seal to keep from coming out. So to me, that's another significant part of this story that we kind of need to stay on top of, because if that document was ever able to be found and brought to the public, that would completely undercut the Biden campaign's defense here.
Yeah, exactly. And by the way, you think the Biden campaign has said a word about whether those files are going to get... By the way, they can unseal them anytime they want.
Yeah, of course.
They're not going to do it.
They're not going to.
All of this reminds me, I brought this up on the show before. There's a 1997 Vanity Fair piece I recommend you all read, and it's about Bill Clinton and feminism. And it's an actual feminist writing about and reckoning with the fact that all of her friends who talked a big game about being feminists and being Democrats were full of it.
Yeah.
They were completely full of it whenever it came to Bill Clinton, who was a dog and treated Monica Lewinsky terribly. And he ruined her life. I mean, essentially. Never apologized for it once. I think he was forced to in one of those famous interviews in 2019. And so, but at that time, they were all just, everybody didn't say a word. Why? Because they were like, well, he's not a great guy, but like he put RBG on the Supreme Court, so it's worth it. And like, that is a blatant political calculation. And if you want to be blatant political actors, fine. I actually don't care. I really don't. But do not lecture and be morally preen and talk about principles whenever it's somebody that you oppose and not somebody that you support.
Yeah,
they say the same calculus then, they're making the same calculus.
Yeah, as you said, at least make that argument outright.
I don't care.
Try to invent some sort of story about why this is really totally different from Christine Blasey Ford, and it justifies a 19-day delay. I know it's so messy and there's so many red flags. It's always messy, right? And if you want to see red flags, you are always going to be able to find red flags. How do you treat those things? You have to treat them consistently. You either treat them skeptically and critically consistently, or you treat them with an acceptance, which errs on the side of believing women, but apply that standard across the board, or else you stand for absolutely nothing. Dan Abrams, who's the founder of Mediaite, also said, and this was interesting, that after reading that Ben Smith New York Times interview with Dean Baquet, that he actually was more convinced that they handled it the wrong way, especially by waiting so long. And you recall their logic was that Kavanaugh was a hot live story, while this was not. Well, guess who gets to choose what is a hot live ongoing story? If it's not the most prestigious paper in the entire world, the paper of record, then who is it?
Exactly. And it's like, this is where the manufacturing consent comes in. You have 6 corporations, 6 stories, maybe 100 people who decide what is a running hot story for the entire country.
Right.
By working within them, when each one of themselves don't do something, they can all just collectively decide it's not news. That's how it works.
Yeah, I mean, the circular logic there is just absolutely astounding, that you would say basically, well, we haven't covered it, therefore it's not a hot live story, therefore we're not going to cover it. But that's literally what they said. And you recall, Alyssa Milano picked up on that same thing, was like, well, no credible media outlets are covering it, so it must not be real, must not be credible.
Yeah.
That's the way these people all think.
That's what they certainly do.
All right, we'll have more Rising for you after this.